This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, thanks, Donny. Appreciate it, and thanks everybody for having me here. It's nice to be a part of something and collaborate with like-minded people and just create some conversation and discussion around these sorts of things. So, again, my name is Adam Weir. I work for the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. I'm a fisheries biologist, but I mainly deal with policy within the Fish and Wildlife Department for the OFAH. And so just a couple little basic tools and functions here is just make sure you have yourself on mute, and you can stop your video too if you want to help your bandwidth and have things go a little bit smoother. In terms of asking questions, just feel free to type it into the chat. So if you hover your cursor over the bottom part of the screen there, you'll see the chat function comes up. Just click on it and you should be able to type your question, whatever, or comment, whatever it may be, right into the chat there. Another important feature as well is you'll see the reactions icon, just like a little smiley face with the plus sign. And so here you'll be able to respond in whatever way you want, but also an important function that I'd like you to key in on is the raise hand. So if you want to chime in and ask a question directly and live without using the chat function, just feel free to raise your hand. And also, I have several dogs. If they start barking, I apologize for that. I'll try and keep them on their beds and resting and not running around and stuff. So the other thing I just wanted to mention too is just be respectful. Nothing derogatory or prejudice, sexist, racist, all of those sorts of things. Just be mindful that we're here for the same general purpose, and it's important to just be respectful in that regard. And otherwise, just happy to be a part of this and kick it off. So,
thanks, Adam. I just want to, I'm Claire Malcolmson. Hi, everybody. I'm the Executive Director of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. First of all, I really want to say a big thanks to all of you for coming and being here tonight and having questions and just being inquisitive people. Really, that's amazing. And then my second big thank you is to Donny, who has become a really great friend and big supporter of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition over the last couple of years. It's been a really fun friendship and partnership. And to Adam Weir and the OFAH for letting him be here and for lending your expertise. I'm really interested in helping build the bridges between the people like me that are working kind of more on the activist and policy issues with people like you who love Lake Simcoe primarily maybe because you fish it, and I think it's really important that we all understand each other better and understand what's going on with the lake and how the stresses that are affecting the lake health, which are the things that I deal with as an advocate, are understood by people who really, like me and everyone on this call, want to help protect Lake Simcoe. So that's really kind of the thinking behind this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition and do a land acknowledgement, and then we will start with some questions. Okay, so the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition is an environmental charity. We were set up in 2003 primarily to help build a bridge between citizens and the people that make decisions about the lake, and that's government. And our biggest success is that we spearheaded the campaign to get the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and Plan in 2008. That was generated by us. This was not a government initiative. It took a lot of work to convince them that they needed to do it. And fish health is at the center of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. So the targets and policies of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan are all oriented around the biological needs of the very special fish we have at Lake Simcoe, the cold water fish, lake trout, and whitefish. Also, I apologize if I bungle any fishing term or say something wrong. I'm not really a great fisherman. Okay, so the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition has 29 member groups all around the lake, from First Nations to cottager associations, residents associations, and even some national water groups. We are concerned about a few big factors that affect lake health. Phosphorus loads, water temperature, which is increasing because of climate change, and the impacts of those two things, phosphorus loads and temperature increases, affect the fish and all the creatures and all the tiny microscopic things that live in the lake. This is why we have a biologist on the call, who won't just call them tiny little things. And so the stresses affect the health of the creatures that live in the lake, and there's really a cascading effect. So what we work on is the issues that affect lake health. So what we've been mostly focused on the last 4 years since I became the executive director, the first executive director of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, we're looking at the pressures of the massive population growth being directed at the watershed, which is the basin that drains into the lake. We're quite focused on the Bradford bypass the last year as well. And we've been trying really hard to get the province to work on implementing and following the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, which is not going that well. And finally, we have a First Nations member group, Georgina Island First Nation, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done and they've done together to, share ideas and to work together to protect the lake that they live in and that they take their drinking water from. So this is not meant to be just kind of a trite land acknowledgement. It means something. So the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition recognizes and acknowledges that the lands originally used and occupied by the first peoples of the Williams Treaty First Nation and other Indigenous peoples. And on behalf of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, we would like to to thank them for sharing this land. We'd also like to acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as our closest First Nation community and recognize the unique relationships that Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and we join them in these responsibilities. I'm actually wearing water protector earrings on purpose tonight. You can buy them on our website. All right, so with that, I am going to hand it over to Donny, who's going to host the Q&A.
Yeah, so I'm Donny Crowder. I am your host tonight. I am a local Lake Simcoe resident. I live here and I play here. I'm a recreational user. I boat here, I fish here, and I hunt here. I do a lot of duck hunting when the seasons allow. I'm also the co-owner of Hot Box Huts. We're an ice hut operation here on Lake Simcoe where we provide opportunities for people to get out on the ice, or hard water as we like to call it. We're the point of connection for a lot of people from mostly the greater Toronto area that want to get out and try something new and experience something new, and they'll come up and usually book with us and they'll come out and check out the ice, catch some perch, catch some pike. We like it because it really helps connect the big city to our big lake. We live here, we play here, and we work here, obviously. We are part of a $420 million a year sustainable recreational sector, which means that we take our little slice of the pie with our efforts we put in, but the recreational sector in Lake Simcoe is huge. Fishing is a very, very large part of that, as you'll see tonight. And we just want to remind everybody the lake here doesn't just belong to the people that live along the shoreline of the lake. The lake belongs to the residents of Ontario. And we should have access for all residents of Ontario to use the lake responsibly for fishing, hunting, and other recreational activities. I'm going to jump in and butt in line, and I'm going to ask the first question tonight. I've had one that I'd like to have for Adam, where lake trout's been a big topic of conversation on the Facebook pages locally, on some of the fishing pages and some of the fishing forums. We have a lot of locals and maybe some people coming out and visiting from the city, and they're providing some anecdotal evidence where they feel that the lake trout levels of larger fish are declining. We can't say it's happening for sure. Maybe we can talk to our expert here. Adam, could you probably speak to what's happening currently with the natural production of lake trout in Lake Simcoe and our stocking efforts?
Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded question for sure. I'm the first one to admit that I don't have all the answers. That's for sure. I don't have a solution really for any of the sort of issues that are being experienced. But just to jump back in time a little bit, it was in the 50s when there was massive recruitment failure with lake trout, and actually stocking first began in the 60s, so the decade after the recruitment failure was noticed. So this was due to, unfortunately, the same sort of issues that we talk about now. So eutrophication, we have habitat loss, fragmentation, degradation, water quality issues, land use practices within the watersheds that lead to water quality issues as well. And unfortunately, the list goes on. And thankfully, Claire and her agency and other conservation NGOs as well are really here kind of fighting the battle, so to speak. So virtually all the wild natural reproducing lake trout were almost completely extirpated. And it wasn't until 2001 where two of the first wild individuals were actually captured that weren't fin clipped. So since then, wild individuals have been captured, but this is at extremely low levels, hence why supplemental stocking has to occur. So on average, the ministry stocks about 100,000 yearling individuals. It was reduced at one point in like 2010, I believe, to about 50,000 individuals to try and promote the wild natural reproducing populations, despite the very low levels. The thought was that this could promote the natural reproduction and not suppress it by stocking so much over top of these individuals. But as you know, like there's a lot of angling pressure on Simcoe. I believe it's in upwards of greater than 600,000 angling hours just in the winter alone. So kind of bringing this timeline along, so there was reduced stocking for a number of years, and then currently we've bounced back to 100,000 per year. Unfortunately, if you look at the trend lines, that generally speaking, the wild populations at the very low levels, like I mentioned, and again, the two individuals being caught in 2001, and it had been decades before where wild individuals had been caught. So this is maintained at a very low level. But what you'll see with the stocked individuals, this is also on account of reduced stocking rates, but the catch per unit effort is decreasing. The trends are definitely trending towards the decline and have been for a number of years now. The same can be said for whitefish as well. So as to the reasoning, it's difficult. I think Claire hit on those overarching themes really in just her intro there and what her organization stands for. And we run into the same problem. So development is a major issue. Urbanization is a major issue too. We have lots of policies and lots of regulations, and it's writing on a page if we're not actually implementing these things and doing everything on the back end that I would argue are the most important things. Oh, Claire, you have I'm just noticing that you have some figures up there too. Yeah, that's exactly right. So exactly what I said, the levels are extremely low in terms of wild lake trout, and thanks for displaying those, Claire. I appreciate it. So it just kind of speaks to the points that I'm really getting at here. So the Fisheries Act is another important piece of legislation that we have, and it's meant for the protection and conservation of fish that we have across Canada, not just lake trout, every type of fish we have, protect fish and fish habitat, and also to help prevent pollution as well. So we need to uphold these things, reduce the death of fish, the harmful alteration, destruction, and disruption of fish habitat as well, and look at cumulative stressors that are occurring. And we need to uphold the provisions that we have in these important pieces of legislation, even at the federal level, let alone the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and what led to the eventual Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. these pieces of policies are the things that we need to adhere to in order to have lake trout rebound, Donny, in order for you to have a business and do what you like to do. Everybody that's either coming to Simcoe, the residents, what have you, I think these are the instruments that we have. I'm notorious for rambling, and I apologize, and I love rabbit holes. Claire, dive in. Yeah, right I could keep going.
Okay, so I thought it actually probably is a good time to just jump in and say, let's just explain the relationship between phosphorus and oxygen in fish. You want to do that, Adam? Because that's something we may be assuming everybody knows, but not everyone knows. Do you want to do that, Adam?
Okay. Yeah, for sure. So just writing notes down just so I don't ramble too much. Phosphorus, oxygen, and fish. So phosphorus, and I'll throw in nitrogen as well there. Those are essentially the building blocks to our fisheries, really. They're the nutrients. They're the means of producing energies and then feeding lower trophic levels all the way up to our top apex predators. Sometimes when we have too much phosphorus and too much nitrogen in these systems, it will produce algae. This could be, say, even cyanobacteria like blue-green algae, which is also harmful in terms of toxins that they produce called microcystins. And there's also nuisance benthic algae too. The issue with these sorts of things is when nutrients feed all these plants and aquatic life that we have, when they die off and they're decomposing, they consume oxygen. So oxygen, as you all know, especially the anglers on the line too, is that's an essential factor and component to fish being able to carry out their life processes. And when you look at cold water fish species in particular, lake trout, lake whitefish, they rely on oxygen even more so than other species, particularly warm water species, and species that can tolerate less oxygen levels, warmer conditions, and might not be as sensitive to these environmental conditions. So yeah, I would say that's the tie-in: phosphorus, nutrients, O2, fish. Thanks, Claire.
All right, Adam, I just gonna jump in there. I'm just curious, where did the originally stocked fish come from? You mentioned two fish. Are these from Lake Simcoe? Is that where we harvest our eggs from when we're stocking Lake Simcoe? Are these Lake Simcoe lake trout that we're stocking to Lake Simcoe, or do they come from elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I can't necessarily speak to the history. One of the issues that we run into stocking in the past is that we didn't understand the negative impacts associated with stocking. So that could be taking strains from other areas and bringing in different genetics to these systems can have pretty disastrous negative consequences within our fisheries. So currently, yeah, it's taking wild individuals and taking the gametes and taking it to, well, it could be community hatcheries, it could be the provincial fish culture system, but yeah, wild individuals, yeah.
Okay. All right, Claire, do you have anything?
Sorry, and I should say though, there's variety of strains within our fish culture system though that we draw from, and then you tailor the strain to the appropriate water body, the receiving water body, on account of that.
So I might just add a little bit of layman term to the oxygen question. So fish need oxygen to breathe in the water, and they need a certain amount of oxygen. So the slide that I will show you again here shows the relationship between phosphorus. Well, it doesn't actually show all of this, but the scientists are tracking dissolved oxygen in the water. They're trying to get it up to this amount, 7 milligrams per liter. That is the target of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. And this, the amount of oxygen in the water, it is in relationship to phosphorus loads. So we have at least twice the amount of phosphorus going into the lake as what the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan target is. And so what's been happening is the more phosphorus that goes into the lake, the worse the oxygen is and the worse it is for fish.
Yeah.
Especially in the lower levels of the lake. And what started to happen now is that there's this weird relationship probably with invasive species that is actually turning all of this science on its head. So cutting edge, Lake Simcoe, it's like, why is this happening? All the scientists can't figure out why, when we have increasing and super high phosphorus loads, like 131 kilograms a year, when the target is 44. That happened in 2017, 131, 44, like so different. So they're trying to understand why dissolved oxygen is improving, and there's a theory that it has something to do with a really aggressive invasive species. So sometimes you have to look behind the headlines. You know, the province is saying, oh, dissolved oxygen's getting better, and the scientists are going, but we don't understand why. It's super crazy. And it's maybe because of a really bad factor. So sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to put the basics out there for if that was helpful for anybody.
No, it is helpful actually, and it just kind of puts some context to things. And what Claire is getting at too is that's the pre-September hypolimnetic dissolved oxygen that they look at. That's actually a part of the Lake Simcoe protection plan. So right now, I believe we hover around the 6 milligram per liter mark on average, at least some of the more recent information that I've seen. And just to explain, the hypolimnetic area is that crucial space within the water column where cold water fish species like lake trout exist. That's why it's critically important. So we really want to hit that target of 7 milligrams per liter, and actually, if possible, exceed it really. So just like to give you some context too, I don't want to be completely doom and gloom, but decades ago in the 80s, it was around approximately 3 milligrams per liter. So it gives you some context in terms of what we have right now. And just to jump back to the lake trout conversation, Donny, to bring it a little full circle there too, is that we have to understand that wild, naturally reproducing lake trout populations were virtually extirpated. And now actually to see some natural reproduction actually occurring within the system at very low levels though, and having those individuals caught in the early 2000s is at least a sign of improvement as well. Previous to 2008, over a 25-year period, the data set indicated that greater than 99% of all the individuals that were caught in terms of lake trout were stocked. So that's what we're talking about in terms of how low wild naturally reproducing lake trout are in Simcoe, just to give you some context there. So.
Okay, thanks, Adam. That was a whole lot of information. I'm taking my notes here to review later. Thank you for that. Guys, if you have any questions at all, jump into the chat, throw them in there. Adam's your guy. He's in the hot seat tonight. He's going to answer anything you have to add. I'm going to jump in with a question that we have from local Steve Pataky. He's a resident close to me here. He lives off Second Line of Innisfil. He's saying in some parts of the world, invasive and naturalized species have become harvested, become part of the local dining scene and sold commercially. What he's talking about is the common carp, which was once an invasive species in Lake Simcoe, and it's now considered a naturalized species. I bowfish these things, and that's what he's talking about here. He's wondering if there's any possibility of selling these giant catfish, they're common carp, that we catch when we're bowfishing, and or possibly netting them and selling them for profit for a with our sizable harvest we get. We know Steve personally, and he's well aware there's times we go bow fishing for common carp in Lake Simcoe, and we haul in over 1,000 pounds of carp a day. It's a species that's kind of overrun in Lake Simcoe. We consider them naturalized at this point. There is definitely no shortage of them. My concern and why we feel good about what we do when we're doing our bow fishing is that we are removing biomass from the lake that's taking from other species. If the carp are there and they're putting in that kind of weight, and we're taking 1,000 pounds a day when we go out, that's not every day. It's when we do go out on occasion. They're hitting other species. Steve's wondering if it's possible down the road to actually sell the fish that we harvest, because we do have clients that come on our bow fishing charters, and they're going home with maybe 20 carp, and we look up the rates in the city and they're selling for $20 a pound. So I see what you're saying there. You know, there is a market there for this. Adam, do you know anything about that? Is it possible that we don't sell anything now? Currently, we use them for bear bait. We feed our dogs. We eat common carp as well. We've had some videos on YouTube where we've done that. Adam, do you think there's a future for maybe a market where we could sell invasives, collect them and sell them to create, you know, an industry maybe where we help remove the invasives and naturalized species from the lake?
Yeah, so I understand what you're getting at there. Just to provide some context, though, is that we do have regulations in the province where we really have liberal regulations to promote harvest of fish that might be not native to a water body, maybe harmful to other fish species that we enjoy, other important sport fish species. And but one of the issues when we get into marketing these things on a commercial scale is that you create value for an invasive species. And the same applies at the aquatic level and terrestrial side of things. So wild pigs is a pretty big topic of conversation right now. And if we were to make it, say, a game species, or if we were to make common carp seem important because now it has this economic value associated with it, that it there's evidence that shows, and research has suggested, that you'll see anglers taking those individuals and distributing them elsewhere. So likewise with wild pig, and it can proliferate the species then. So, you know, if it was a hunter, they were hunting wild pig, but then they wanted them somewhere else in the province, maybe. Not saying that we need to point the finger or put any blame on anybody at all, but these things have happened. There's demonstrated evidence in North America for these sorts of things too. So I would say no. Let's keep them a naturalized species. That's exactly right, Donny, where we can enjoy, but leave the commercial industry up to the people that are licensed to commercially harvest, you know, whatever species are listed on their license. Like you said, common carp, they can destroy fish habitat, particularly wetland habitat as well. Their feeding behavior disrupts the sediments and can stir up the bottom and make the water very, very turbid as well, and not clear. So there's numerous negative things associated with common carp if they're put in the wrong place. Right now, they're here to stay, and they're important sport fish for a lot of people.
Right on. I do understand that if you assign a value to a species, you've basically protected that species, as you've seen with the wild boar in the southern U.S. Understood, 100%. Okay, I won't be selling my carp in the future. We do have another question on there. It's from Brandon. Again, guys, anybody can ask a question anytime. Just post it up in the chat. We can see it here and we'll throw it at Adam. How are gobies affecting the lake? Are they affecting the reproduction of trout and whitefish and general lake health? And what can we do about it? Do we need to do anything about it, Adam?
Yeah, a really good question. Just writing some notes just so I don't get too sidetracked. So yeah, goby, they come to North America via ballast water. They're from the Black and Caspian Seas, which is located in Eastern Europe. So there numerous studies and research have indicated that the harmful effects gobies can have, particularly in predation on fish eggs. Dr. Bruce Tuss from the Freshwater Fisheries Conservation Lab in Queen's University, he has an awesome video that I welcome anybody on the call to look up. And it's literally a smallmouth bass attempting to defend its nest. As it's defending the nest, though, gobies from every single angle are coming in and just picking off eggs like one at a time. Essentially, it's a free-for-all, really. So I think in terms of a visual impact, that for me speaks a lot. Donny, you made a good comment of like common carp being huge, you know, in upwards of 40 pounds potentially, and they're taking all that biomass away from other valuable native fish species that we have. And so likewise with goby too. Think of all the prey fish that we have, everything that a goby consumes that could be going to our native fish. So it's difficult to tell. So it wasn't until 10 years after goby were found in Lake Simcoe in 2006 that they started showing up in diet studies for lake trout in their stomachs. So, and I've also seen images of lake whitefish that are their stomachs are split open and just absolutely engorged on round goby. So with all these negative things, there's also some interesting shifts within these ecological systems and food webs where you see fish starting to capitalize on that new invasion, essentially. But gobies, they're also a vector for botulism as well. So they have some negative effects, not just at a fisheries level, but also in the disease and pathogen world as well. Another thing with gobies too is that Claire already mentioned about nutrients being locked up in, say, quagga and zebra mussels. Gobies actually feed on zebra mussels too. So an adult goby will eat in upwards of 70 zebra mussels in a day. So now it's interesting because we can be sort of unlocking these nutrients from these dreissynid mussels and then bringing them into these systems where they were not biologically available. So don't get me wrong, they're very bad. I would argue almost any invasion from a non-native, non-indigenous species has some serious repercussions. But at this point in time, and it's relatively new, it's difficult to tell exactly how it's impacting these food webs, to what extent, and the boom and bust that we typically see with invasive species. What will happen after that as well. So they do this like astronomical spike up the populations and then that crash down. Rainbow smelt is a good example of that, right? You talk to anybody back in the day in Simcoe fishing every trib where you have a good run of smelt and taking them by the bag full. But now, I would doubt that it's as good as that the heyday experienced in the past. So anyways, hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, 100%. Adam, you mentioned botulism. Is this something that gobies would spread to larger prey species in the lake?
So birds in particular, Donnie. So if you've ever seen cormorants and they look like almost paralyzed, I've seen them before where their heads are drooping in the water. And some drown that way as well. Really odd behavior. You see it in, I've seen it in common loon as well, doing fisheries surveys within the Great Lakes, where you can see a number of them wiped out, just like really odd behavior and like fumbling and tumbling around. So to speak to that too, we've also recently we're going to be we are producing a fish and wildlife disease fact sheet, and we'll distribute it too, and maybe we can do it through this group and anybody who's joined in on this call too, but just how to report, signs to look out for, and diseases to keep on your radar as well. So that's just a little aside there. But yeah, so Donnie, you said you like waterfowl hunting, so that's another thing to consider for sure.
Okay, that's all new information for me. Thanks, Adam. I really appreciate that. We have another question there asking how zebra mussels relate to the same, the lake trout and whitefish reproduction and the health. In my experience, when I'm out now on the water, and even the shallows of Cook's Bay, I can't find zebra mussels, but I can find the round quaggas. Do you want to speak to zebra mussels and quagga mussels in Lake Simcoe?
Yeah, it's not a huge area of expertise for me. I would suggest if anybody wants to learn a lot more than what I can provide them, the Invading Species Awareness Program is a conservation program that the OFAH administers. I'm sure most of you have heard of it or seen signs all around the lake. Going to the website would be great. It's a partnership with the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry, the NDMNRF, whatever that acronym is. But anyways, yeah, you're right. It seems to be this thing where we had zebra mussels and they were quite common and all over the place, and then they're kind of been pushed aside, and now it seems to be more dominated by quagga, and there's also offshore deep water mussels that are apparently of concern as well. So zebra mussels and quagga, I believe, were introduced in the 1990s. So they filter particulate matter, and it reduces the turbidity. Turbidity is like water clarity, if you don't know. So it makes clearer conditions. So water can penetrate, or I should say sunlight can penetrate the water, get down to the bottom. And so aquatic vegetation tends to grow and proliferate a lot more. So this probably also causes issues with starry stonewort, but that's another conversation altogether. The problem with it is that they divert energy, like we talked about before with the round goby. They take it and they hold it. And so there's a term called shunting. So there's the nearshore shunt. And so that's exactly what sort of explains that's happening. It's taking all that energy and locking it up essentially. And then it's not really as biologically available to other species within the water body. So it also, this causes issues with the pelagic zone and also reduces nutrients that are feeding our lower trophic levels with, say, for example, like phytoplankton and zooplankton as well. And again, those are like the essential building blocks to our fish communities that we rely on so heavily. Donny, I think we've talked about it before, where we have this particular focus on sport fish species and the ones that we value so much. Me being a muskie angler, that's my jam, but it's like all these other things like lower trophic levels and these interconnected food webs that lead to the top, and the things that we care about so much. So we got to give just as much attention to those lower trophic levels as we do the valuable sport fish that we talk about too. There we go. Claire, I'm assuming you put that up.
I did. I did because pictures are helpful. For full disclosure, these are just screen caps of the Science Day that the province of Ontario put on and then didn't share. So I'm sharing the science because it was paid for with your tax dollars, and I figure everyone has a right to see it. So this is, the Lake Simcoe scientists putting on a show of all this research. They do a huge amount of research on the Lake Simcoe ecosystem, and it's really important that people are able to see this. So there's some pictures at the bottom of really what Adam was just talking about, the zooplankton, and these are the mussels. And so there have been some other slides that sort of show the relationship. These are benthic invertebrates that live in streams and in the nearshore area. And these are all really important indicators of health. And they're the bottom of the food chain, meaning, of course, they feed all the things that are here, which feed the things that are up here. So if you have a collapse of these guys, then you don't have any food for the higher levels of the food chain, which are the ones that we want to eat. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for that. I have a question for Adam. You mentioned trophic levels. What's a trophic level?
It's a good question. So trophic level are just, I think you could describe it more like a triangle. So it's the building blocks of a ecological community. So basically the lower base of that triangle being, say, phytoplankton and zooplankton. And then as you get that energy or block consumed and that energy is used, so maybe above that would be prey fish communities. Above that you would be looking at fish that feed on those prey fish, so on and so forth. So in terms of generally speaking, like a good healthy system is you have all of those components that make up that triangle. So that's where when you have a fishery that has an apex predator, for example, like muskie, because I like muskies. So they're the top of that food chain. So it means everything within that system is functioning to a certain degree to allow for that fish to exist, that type of species of fish. Akin to that apex predator, maybe lake trout in Lake Simcoe would potentially be a good example. But at the same token, we're also doing rehabilitative and supplemental stocking on Simcoe because there are some obvious inherent issues, and even the anglers that you have spoken about, Donny, are recognizing that. And it's important as a biologist to take these anecdotal observations and personal experiences and tie them into that with the data and the science that we see. I think it's a blending of all those things that really where we find shed some light on these sorts of things. When we just look at one or the other, we run into issues, but having collaborative discussions like this is just how we actually move yardsticks on these sorts of things.
Okay, awesome. So it's basically the relationship between big predator species and all the food chain below it. That's fantastic. So if we don't have a healthy lake and a healthy food chain, we don't have our top predator species that we want to go out and fish for. And Adam loves his muskie. That brings me to a question that we had that came in before the chat. So I'm going to jump into that right now. Adam, we had stocking of muskie on Lake Simcoe. I know I've adopted a few over the years. I was always hoping they get caught, because if they got caught, you would be alerted and notified that your adopted muskie was still alive and well. I'm assuming that my muskies are in pike's bellies at this point. Did it work? Why are we not doing it anymore? And what can we do in the future to help with the muskie population on Lake Simcoe?
Okay, yeah. Claire, stop me if I start rambling on this one, because it's near and dear to me, this one. So when I was in school, I actually volunteered at the Muskellunge Research Facility and helped rear muskie for this project. So this is the reintroduction of muskellunge into Lake Simcoe project. So it was initiated in 2005. And I also help students in terms of doing the coded wire tag for individuals that were stocked. I participated in some of the habitat rehab work that was done, and vegetative plantings as well, and also the actual stocking events too. And then fast forward a bit, I was working for the Conservation Authority, and I was the operator of the boat when we caught the first muskies that had been caught in over 16 years in 2014. So as a part of that, and I don't want to take credit for it, because there's excellent, very smart, capable biologists and ministry staff like Will Wegman. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. He's a personal friend of mine, and just he's one of the good ones. He just has his heart and soul into these sorts of things, and he just is a leader in so many different ways within the fishing community and within the ministry itself. So anyways, I was so happy to be a part of that. And so those were actually migrants, I believe, from the Kawarthas, but the story is a little bit bigger than that. I understand that it's shut down now, but we also caught a hybrid individual. So it was a tiger muskie that was a cross between a northern pike and a muskellunge. This is actually a good news story, because it shows that there is successful spawning that is occurring to some degree. It might not be the exact outcome that we want, but it has shown and proved that there can be successful spawning. We also caught subadult muskie as well. So the good news story about that is that it's indicating that the stocked individuals are surviving a little bit longer than just, as Donny jokingly said, fish for northern pike in the system. So there are some good news stories. It's hard to say exactly what's going to happen now. What we need, and what's always very important, is that when you implement a project, you need to have things on the back end. And what I mean by that is that you need monitoring assessment to evaluate these sorts of things. So what I would like to see is, say, part of the nearshore community index programs that the Lake Simcoe Fisheries Assessment Unit, maybe to have components of the program that really are geared towards investigating, monitoring, and fulfilling some of these research needs for muskie. I don't want to see that program completely end. What I'd like to see, at the very least, is ongoing monitoring and assessment needs that are geared towards fulfilling the goals and objectives of the restoration project that me personally, I was involved in so much, and that's having a viable, sustainable reproducing population of muskellunge. I think a lot of people would like to see that. Anyways, I go on, I digress.
I just put a slide here that shows a bunch of different fish, sort of their abundance over time. Just that might be some general info. And I'm looking for a map of where the phosphorus is monitored, Fabio. So maybe skip to a different question, Donny, while I try to find that.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to ask Adam really quickly too. He mentioned a couple times there that they've caught muskie, right? They've caught tiger muskie and juvenile muskie. How are you catching these? Are you going out there and throwing big spinner baits, or is there actually traps in the water to catch these fish?
Yeah, I think the fish, the moniker "fish of 10,000 casts" would be more like "fish of 1,000,000 casts" with the number of muskellunge in Lake Simcoe. So what we were doing was mainly electrofishing. So it's literally a big boat electrofisher with big anodes that hang off the front of the boat, and you're electrocuting the water. So you're not killing the fish. What it's called is electrotaxis, and it's essentially force swimming towards the anodes. So you'll literally see, when it's all dialed in properly, fish swimming towards the anodes, and then you have netters on the bow of the boat that are netting these fish, and then they're swung around to be processed and sampled and released to swim another day. So don't think we took any sort of aging structures. You'd probably have to euthanize them to be able to do that. But we took scales to do genetic work, and that's where the results came back in terms of where they were from. And yeah, so from my understanding, most of the individuals are caught via electrofishing. But there's some good reports, actually, Donny, that maybe we could distribute at the end of this as well, that give a review of the entire reintroduction of muskellunge into Lake Simcoe project that we could share with people. It's a great read. It was Steve Kerr from the ministry that actually did the summary on it, and he's retired now, but he's done so much work for the ministry in that regard. So
fantastic. I'm seeing a couple questions pop up, like Claire mentioned, about phosphorus and salt load monitoring. I can speak to that a little bit. As an ice hut operator on Cooks Bay, Lake Simcoe, we volunteered for Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority's sampling program. So we actually take samples while we're out in the ice of water, and we supply them to the authority for observation. And I know locally in Innisfil, the Simcoe Muskoka Health Unit has a few monitoring sites. I know one of them is Second Line, where we run our ice huts out of. And they keep tabs on certain areas along the shoreline here. I'm not sure for the whole lake, but I know locally Simcoe Muskoka Health Unit and Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority are keeping on tabs of that. We have a question there about, there's a gentleman, Colton. He fishes, he hunts, he's on the lake almost every day of the year. He's been noticing changes in his catch, where he's been finding lake trout are now less than 10 pounds on average, where they're usually a little bit larger. He's wondering if there's a spot where locals could report their catch to the ministry. Is there anywhere to say what we're seeing anecdotally and express what we're seeing? I do know that during the winter we've seen them. Ministry of Natural Resources is out and about, and they're doing creel studies, and they're doing their surveys out in the lake where they're collecting information. But is there somewhere where we can send our information as fishermen and people on the lake to, in our observations at the time?
yeah, there's a few avenues that come to mind there, Donny. So one thing is that Lake Simcoe has the Lake Simcoe Fisheries Stakeholder Committee, and it has, like the name suggests, stakeholder representatives at the table. So we collaborate. So OFAH and a number of other organizations and anglers and people where their heart is Simcoe, and we collaborate with the ministry on these sorts of things. So it might be stocking, regulation changes, and we collaborate, share ideas and expertise. And this is done at the FMZ level as well. So many FMZs across the province have advisory councils. So they function basically the exact same way as the Fisheries Stakeholder Committee. So you can contact the Aurora District Office. That's the number to contact them is online. You could also send me an email if you want. If there's certain things that you see or that you notice, you can send me an email, and then I can log that, and it can be something that I can bring to the table at the the Fisheries Stakeholder Committee. I welcome these sorts of things, especially if you're a member too of our organization. We take in feedback from our members and things that they see or that they're witnessing. And like I said, how important it is the cross-cutting of what anglers and hunters see on the landscape or on the water and bringing that into the world of science is critically important. So often they're the whistleblowers for these sorts of things, and it might be seeing it before the biologists even do, you know? So you can bring it to me, bring it to the Aurora District Office, and that's at least a couple avenues that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100% make your observations known. You mentioned Will Wegman, who is a steward of the lake for sure. I'm sending him relentless messages every year, my observations, whether it's bass with white fuzz on them or funny looking carp, and I'm always tossing them what I'm seeing out there in the lake, and he usually gives me pretty good feedback, and he checks into things too and lets me know the lowdown on things that are happening out there. More questions. Daniel Zay, invasive species is definitely a hot topic tonight. He's concerned about grass carp, and they're migrating from the U.S. north. They have been collected in Erie. Are there any plans in place to prevent the invasion of this more aggressive species into Lake Simcoe? Could they end up in Lake Simcoe? Are they part of our waterway, part of our watershed? Could they get here? And I guess I'll add to that question too. The ones in Erie, were these able to reproduce, or were these, these might have been carp that escaped, right?
Yeah. So the Sandusky is one of the tributaries across the border, the Sandusky River, where there are naturally reproducing populations of grass carp for sure, and they have been caught often by commercial fishers actually in Lake Erie as well. And then I personally, while again doing electrofishing monitoring assessments, I was actually doing a research project within the Toronto Islands, and we captured a 32-pound fecund female. She was experiencing atresia, which is reabsorption of the eggs. So if they don't expel the eggs, sometimes fish will like hold on to them and absorb them, and so really indicate signs that there is absolutely potential. As you know, that's in Lake Ontario, and there's been other individuals too. I caught that one female and then caught another individual that night, saw another, and the next day the rest of my crew came in and caught the other individual. So they've also been caught on Tommy Thompson Park, and these were all one individuals that had access to open coast Lake Ontario and could roam and migrate wherever they want to. So absolutely, there is potential. Donny and whoever asked that question, and anybody on the line, for grass carp to potentially invade a provincially significant inland fishery like Lake Simcoe. Grass carp, they, like the name suggests, they feed on aquatic vegetation, so that there's our fish habitat for a number of fish species. So you could only imagine the impacts that a 80-pound, potential 80-pound grass carp could actually have. This is why prevention is key, and it's something that we really speak about in the Invading Species Awareness Program, and having the conservation framework that's designed around prevention. Once an invasive species enters the system, it's next to impossible to eradicate it. Eradication through conservation through eradication is almost impossible, unless back in the day, there was the use of rotenone, which is never something that I would ever suggest nowadays. But that it speaks to the difficulties in terms of eliminating these sorts of things. So yes, it is a threat. We need better framework, better policies, better regulations for preventing these sorts of things from happening, and it needs to be embedded within our legislation and policies. And it's critically important for our fisheries. If you value them, then we need these sorts of things in place.
Can I just jump in here for a sec? Because you are very fast, Donny, which is great. But I want to go back to the phosphorus question because I found the slide. And then I'm going to do two other things. One is I'm just putting a link in the chat to the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority has a science newsletter that actually might be very helpful. So I'm going to give you that. And then I'm also going to give you a link, which I would just encourage you to open up while you're here on the call, which has a whole bunch of links to stuff that the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition is working on. I don't want you to look at it and read it now, but it's going to be easier for you to have access to information later if I just give you the link to the document tonight. And I don't want to miss you if anybody leaves early. So, okay, I'm going to show you now the slide about where the monitoring of phosphorus takes place. It looks like, really, in short, it's all over the watershed, but, you know, not everywhere. But it's in the tributaries, and I think that they actually do some full lake, like out in the lake monitoring as well. And this is a combination of provincial ministries and the Conservation Authority, the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, and they also monitor flow and I would imagine, yeah, stream gauges and water quality monitoring stations are both shown there. So the stream gauge will be looking at the flow, and the flow, just very simply, is definitely being affected by climate change. And when the years that we have really, really high flows, we also have very high phosphorus loads. And this is something that not everybody knows. It's not an obvious kind of connection, but it is important to understand the connection between what happens on the land and how it affects the lake. So if you have a whole lot of farm fields and development sites that just sit stripped bare for years in development, that happens. It shouldn't happen, but it does. It's really bad for the lake, because whenever you have major storm event, whether that's in any season, as long as there's water falling on the ground and it is flowing over a frozen surface is kind of the worst. But if it flows into the lake, it also carries all the dirt, a lot of dirt with it, and phosphorus is naturally occurring in dirt and in manure and in sewage. So when we have these major rain events, we now see really high phosphorus loads. And so if nothing else, that helps explain the relationship between climate change and that phosphorus impact on Lake Simcoe, because those major storm events are increasingly attributable to changes in our weather patterns, which come from climate change impacts. I'm going to stop interrupting now. Carry on.
Awesome. That's some great information, Claire. Yeah, like locally here, we've seen algae blooms, and I'm sure that's related to phosphorus runoff, you know, while we still have frost in the ground during the spring thaw for sure. We got a question from Nielsen asking about burbot. I'm interested in this question as well. Burbot has gotten pretty popular in the last few years. Should there be a limit on them? I'm wondering personally too, has burbot become popular because the species is growing and there's more numbers? Are we seeing a higher biomass of burbot, or is it just simply more anglers are targeting them? Because it seems that there's definitely no shortage anymore. Adam, what do you think of the burbot population currently, and should we put a limit on them?
Yeah, so there's actually a good report. I'm forgetting the name of it now. It basically synthesizes data from 2011 to 2018 and looks at the fish community, but it has some information on burbot. If I had the graph, I'd love to share it with you, Donny, because the catch per unit effort on the ministry side, it really does seem to be increasing. So just kind of anecdotally on my part, though, it kind of doesn't necessarily surprise me, because you think of burbot as a benthic cold water species, and you think of the invasion of round goby, which is also closely tied to being a benthic species as well, that you would think burbot would really be able to capitalize on the invading round goby. So in terms of actual numbers, though, that are going on, I think it's something in upwards of 100 times less is being caught per year than compared to lake whitefish. So you would really need to look at the catch, the effort, what's sustainable, maximum sustainable yield, and different thresholds. And that could be done using the ministry's data and information that they have. So hard to say at this point if we actually need to go as far as implementing a regulation. But as far as I'm concerned, if something is happening and it's unsustainable, or the data would suggest that it's a conservation concern, what's currently going on, then it would warrant a potential regulation change. I don't know if we're there yet with poor man's lobster, but yeah, it seems to be not just burbot, actually, a lot of other what some people refer as coarse species. Donny, you say you like bow fishing for carp, and freshwater drum seem to be getting a resurgence too, and people really enjoy catching them. And some of these fish that weren't traditionally all that popular are actually becoming more popular too. Even in media like meat eater, for example, you see them often going for these more, I would say, like obscure fish species. And so yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's an observation that's well warranted, because I see it too. Even in Ontario Editors magazine that we publish, actually, there's been a number of articles and features on angling for burbot too, right? So we'll see if regulations are ever needed, though, to help conserve the species.
Right on. I love our oddball coarse species, including bowfin. We have a lot of fun fishing for bowfin, sight fishing bowfin down in the bottom end of Cook's Bay. Right around the same time we're bow fishing for carp, we usually carry a rod with a spinner bait just to target those bowfin we see at the surface, because they're aggressive. They're hard to get a hook set into, but man, do they ever put up a fight, and they're a lot of fun. You just got to watch your fingers, because they do have a set of chompers on them.
Yeah, and they're another one too. I've heard of a lot of people angling for them. They're an interesting species too, because they gulp water, and so they bring water into their swim bladder and essentially use it as like an auxiliary lung. They also estivate, which is a word basically used to describe like this summer hibernation period. So in these low, like these murky backwater areas, low oxygen, they just kind of sit there and rest and estivate is a term that's used. And Donny, you've probably seen them in the springtime too, when they're emerald green color too. And that's the spawning colors of the male, really. And you'll notice that distinct spot on the tail as well, which is a lot more faint in the females, and they don't have that brilliant emerald green. But if you haven't seen it, it almost looks like like a lime green color. So it's pretty neat, though. Sorry, just
No, it's an exciting species. They're almost glow in the dark. It looks like it almost looks unnatural. Like they're a toxic fish. They're glowing, they're vibrant with their green. The really cool thing too is in the winter, sometimes they actually pop their heads up in the ice huts out of the hole, and they grab a gulp of air and head back down. So they startle people on occasion in Cook's Bay when they have one of these things pop up in search of oxygen and a breath of air. But they're definitely fun. There's a lot of species of fish in Lake Simcoe. Adam can probably speak to how many, probably a lot more than I can name, but there's a lot of different species that you can target for recreational fishing. We're going to jump on to Colton again. He wants to talk about sport fish limits and slot sizes. I'll elaborate on that a bit. I see a lot of conversations on our Facebook pages about Lake Simcoe fishing, particularly regarding slot sizes for jumbo perch and whitefish and lake trout. And it seems to be that a lot of the general population, recreational fishers, believe that if we were to introduce a slot size for perch, it would help the fishery. And as well, if we had introduced a slot size for lake trout, that would help the fishery. What are your thoughts on that, Adam?
Yeah, it could. Yeah, there are, it's hard to say. So what we have, I shouldn't say what the ministry has is models. So you'd look at the FMSS models, and you basically can throw all the data information into these models, and then it computes it in a way where you can test various regulations. So it could be a protected slot, harvestable slot, minimum or maximum size-based regulations, and all those sorts of different options that we have. So if you had the right data that you could feed into the models and test these sorts of things, then yeah, what you need though is to first identify that there is a problem, and it's like looking at research and studies that help indicate these sorts of things, and then that leads to looking at regulation options. And just to describe the system and how it's set up, then it would go to the fisheries stakeholder committee that I talked about. Then it would eventually get publicly posted, likely to the Environmental Registry of Ontario for public comment, and then potentially it would become a regulation. So there's a staged process through these sorts of things. So whether or not that's the solution to some of the fisheries woes is a different story altogether. We need to keep in mind that regulations, it's a single lever that we have. The issue with fisheries is as we've figured out on this call today, is that they're inherently complicated, and there's never sort of one thing like, this regulation will fix all of our problems. We saw it with, say, lake herring, Cisco. It's a multitude of problems that eventually lead to a last sort of resort, which is a moratorium on the fishery. But there's just all these factors that are contributing to it. It's not that the regulation was the solution to it. There's just so many other things to consider. So just keep that in mind when we're throwing around potential regulation options. People often jump to stocking as well as this like be all end all solution. Well, it isn't, unfortunately. It never is. I can say that pretty confidently, that there's other things that need to be addressed. It's one tool in the toolbox, just like regulations, and we need a multi-pronged approach to all of these sorts of things. So, sorry, long-winded answer, but.
No, that's a great answer. I know when we're reading the Facebook pages ourselves, it seems like a lot of recreational anglers may not spend a lot of time on Lake Simcoe. They come up when they can, and they may have a bad day of fishing. They may not have been on the fish that day. And then I'm seeing posts for the rest of the season about how the fishery is in decline, and how, and sometimes I just wonder, maybe these guys need to maybe get out a little bit more, try different areas, or perhaps hire a guide or a hut operator or a summer boat charter. Because I know with jumbo perch, we have a lot of them here. If you're not finding them the day that you're out, maybe try another day, try another area. Someone did ask if we've ever had grass carp in Lake Simcoe. I don't think we have. Adam, have we? No, nothing yet. Okay, that's good. Claire's asked, she'd like to know, why are the rocks fuzzy in the spring? She actually might have the answer to that too in relation to salt. Claire, want to go ahead?
No, I don't think there's a salt relationship with rock fuzz. But really, springtime, you think, what is growing? Why is there anything growing at all? I just wanted to know if Adam had a more scientific answer about why the rocks are fuzzy in the spring.
So I don't know if I know the exact reason for that, but the thing that comes to mind and that I'm more familiar with within the Great Lakes is nuisance benthic algae. I'm not sure exactly if this is the issue that you're talking about, particularly with Lake Simcoe, but this is something that I've encountered a lot in nearshore areas within the Great Lakes. This benthic algae is referred to as Cladophora, and it can affect ecosystem health, but also can just be a nuisance to residents and homeowners. And as it decays and decomposes and die-offs occur, it stinks as well. And also, just like we talked about with other forms of algae like blue-green algae, is that it consumes oxygen as well. So it can have pretty harmful consequences to our aquatic environments too, if that's what it is.
And this is related to excess nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, and what else would make that happen?
Yeah, so like you said, those building blocks, so those nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen that are feeding into these systems. And you mentioned it before, Claire, like during the spring freshet too, is that we have all of this runoff occurring. We have frozen ground, everything spilling into our waterways and then feeding into important fisheries like we have in Simcoe. And that's where we can have just an excessive nutrient overload, really. So it doesn't surprise me. And it's like Cladophora happens, like algae blooms happen. It's when it's the anthropogenic influence and where we've caused it to be something that isn't so natural, that's unnatural, that's happening too much. And it's, you can really point fingers at exactly the point and non-point sources of these essentially pollution inputs. And so yeah.
Claire, did that cover everything you wanted there? So we do have some questions that came in ahead of time. We have maybe 3 more of them. Warm water. Oh, go ahead,
There's also
Claire.
Wayne. Wayne Lintock has his hand raised here.
Yeah. Does he want to type his question in the chat box? I did message.
Or he could just ask it. He could ask.
I'd actually like to speak to it in person if I could, if that's possible.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. My name's Wayne Lintock. Obviously, I live in Oro Station. I worked for Natural Resources for 33 years. The last 15 years as a conservation officer, and also worked on Lake Simcoe during that time, both plain clothes and uniform. And since I retired, for the last 10 years, I'm out on the lake fishing about 25 days a year, mainly whitefish on sort of the Oro side of the lake, from Long Shoal, Big Bay Point, all up to Woodland Beach. And what's really concerning me, particularly in the last 3 years, is what I've noticed as a very dramatic decline in the abundance of whitefish. And if you look at the index netting information that's been provided by M&R between 2009 and 2019, if you can pull that up, Claire, please. There has been a very dramatic decline in the abundance of whitefish on Lake Simcoe. And missing from that is the information from the last 3 years. And I think in the last 3 years, there's been even a further and more dramatic decline in whitefish, to a point where, you know what I mean? I think they're on the brink of going the same way as lake trout. And just, for example, the year before last, I went out 25 times, and on average, I caught 1 whitefish every time I went out. I didn't keep them all. And then last year I went out about 25 times and I caught 5. And this year I went out 25 times and I caught 2. And I fished in a number of different areas I never fished before. I fished deep, I fished shallow, and I went for days at a time without even marking fish. And I think there is not been an acknowledgement by M&R that this population is on a very steep decline, and that it's really at a point where, there needs to be some further assessment done to try and establish why this is taking place, and if there can be something done to try and reduce this decline from happening. And I guess that's my concern.
Can I jump in there, Donny? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Wayne, it's a completely valid point. Unfortunately, I don't have the graph to share with you, but I can think of exactly the one that you're talking about, and it really looks at a time series from 2011 to 2018, and it's the CPUE and catch rates, and for wild and stocked individuals that are just on this obvious downward decline. And so effort, catch, and harvest of lake trout and whitefish, like you mentioned, between the same period have been below historical levels as well. So there's some obvious issues as well in that regard. So lake trout and lake whitefish, there needs to be some measures that are taken, some conservation measures that are taken to help get some better traction within these fisheries.
That's the one right there we want to look at in terms of the there's the index netting information right there, I believe. I guess the
And it does-
concern is there really an appreciation of where this, the significance of this decline and what is, what I mean, is M&R doing anything about it? And you know what I mean? I think we're at a point in time that someone needs to acknowledge that this population's really in some trouble, with the exception of maybe, off of Brecken and over in Tor where they caught some fish, this year, and they seem to still be catching fish. But my concern is that this is sort of going unnoticed or unrecognized. And, we're headed in a really bad direction, and we're going in the same direction as lake trout. And that's, I guess, just my comments and on this.
I'd be happy to just share an opinion with everybody here. I have a master's degree in planning. I don't have a biology background. But I have been watching Lake Simcoe policy very closely for 20 years. And 2 years ago, the Minister of the Environment produced a report on Lake Simcoe's health. And it was not as comprehensive and it was not as clear as what we'd seen in prior iterations. So the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and Plan require the production of a science report at least every 5 years. And it's really important that the political report and the science report are presented as two different things, because obviously they're two different things. But that's not what this government did. They put them all together. And so just the way that they did it all together made me worried. And a lot of the way that they've been framing the health of Lake Simcoe had me worried as well. And I wrote a blog about it, and it kind of caught the attention of the media. And it was something that really resonated with people, because I think nobody wants to be misled about information that's really important to them. And so I take your point. I think that this is a piece of news that doesn't make the government look good if they are claiming to protect Lake Simcoe. So of course I want them to do a better job at protecting Lake Simcoe. That's why I do what I do. And that's why we're sharing this information with you. I mean, the Lake Simcoe Science Report, or it's called the Minister's Report on Lake Simcoe. I'm not saying that what is in that report is wrong. It's that there's quite a lot of information that is not included there that should be, and the political framing of it is not, I think, the way the science community would present it exactly. It's been interesting for me to follow some of the fishing forums more this year too, and to see a lot of comments that are similar to what you've just said.
And just thinking too, Wayne, why don't we, if somebody's taking notes here on our end, we could write that down as a concern that was brought forward during the meeting, and something that I can bring back to the ministry. And like I mentioned, the fisheries stakeholder committee as well. It's all on the radar, though, Wayne. I think these things move slowly, as you know, just politics and bureaucracy and red tape and all these sorts of things. But it's on the radar. Unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me, thinking of high harvest rates ranging from 80% to 97%. And I think whitefish have approximately 1.5 million angler hours per year towards the species as well. Not saying that anglers are to blame, but in terms of added stressors, it wouldn't surprise me if these are potential issues. And I think there's probably strategies that we could look at and speak to the angling community and find solutions to these sorts of things. So appreciate the feedback there.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. That's some really great input, especially from the north end of the lake. I know down here on Cooks Bay, we have more people out fishing than usual, but we're seeing an increase in whitefish catches in the shallow waters of Cooks Bay. But 4 years ago, I went up to Kempenfelt Bay fishing super late season on 2 inches of very, very clear, dangerous ice for whitefish. I catch my 2, I go home. I think fishing pressure could possibly be part of the reason for this, because I did find 4 years ago when I went out in that extremely thin ice, as I traveled around walking on foot, I did find a lot of dead whitefish that had floated up to the surface that were trapped below the ice. I did cut holes and pull them out, and they did show signs of recently being hooked. And I'm wondering if maybe fishing pressure in the deep waters on Lake Simcoe, bringing these fish up from 100 plus feet down, bringing them up for the purpose of sport fishing and then releasing them, maybe they all don't survive, and that could be an issue as well. Because I do know guys on the lake, I know some very skilled guides that could go out and easily catch 20 or 30 in a day at this point. How many of those are going to survive the catch and release process? It's kind of unknown because we're not tagging them, right? But yeah, Wayne, that's definitely something to consider. Complete 180 from the cold water species we're talking about.
Oh, can I just jump back in here for a minute, please? I think Dan Harries, who's another retired conservation officer, is trying to speak, but I'm not sure he knows to hit the reaction button to flag he wants on.
We don't see it. I don't see it. Does anyone else see it?
Oh, he's holding his hand up right
Yeah,
there.
Dan, just unmute.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Harries. I'm going to support Wayne's ideas here. Sorry, I got a bit of laryngitis here, but I'm a conservation officer, was a conservation officer for 33 years on Lake Simcoe. I worked for until 1988 on the York and Durham side, and from 1988 to 2014 on the Lake Simcoe side. Plus, I've been an active angler on Simcoe since 1970, so over 50 years of experience on it. I've seen the fall, the rise, and then the subsequent fall of the cold water fishery over those years, the introduction of your invasive species, etc. But I've never been so concerned about this fishery in my entire career as I am right now. The numbers of whitefish, we know lake trout have gone down, but the number of whitefish in the last 2 years have plummeted. I know where to fish, I know how to fish, and I can't catch fish. And same sort of thing that Wayne is saying. But what's really got me concerned here, and maybe Adam, you can jump in here, whatever. There's a disconnect going on in this lake. I know there's so many dynamics, but you've got fishermen now that have got high-tech gear like they've never had. They've got the internet. They've got, they're on top of this fishery like it's never been on top of before. But back in the day when we had low oxygen levels, etc., the fish numbers were down. The stocking program kicked in. Fish numbers flourished. The fishing was unbelievably good. And now we've got a situation where the oxygen levels are pretty good again. That those late summer, early fall oxygen levels are pretty good. We're still considering about the same number of whitefish per year that are being stocked. Those fish aren't being recruited. You don't see those fish becoming adults. And there's a disconnect. We're putting those fingerlings in, but they're not reaching adult size. And you're seeing now that the majority of fish you see now are natural fish on Simcoe. Even though we're continually putting 140,000 fish in there, or whatever it is for whitefish, they are not entering the fishery. And there's something wrong here, and I don't know what it is. And that's what we need to do. We need to find out where this disconnect is and try to fix it. I know there's a lot of dynamics, but that is the big issue here. Those fish aren't being recruited. So that's about my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
No, the 2 cents are quite valuable, not just from yourself, Dan, but also from Wayne there. And again, it gets back to my point about just anglers being the eyes and ears on the aquatic landscape and bringing these things to the attention of the ministry is critical. And, I pride our organization as a conduit for that. And I think one of my goals out of this was kind of more on not a personal level, but just in terms of my role with the OFAH, as I sort of expected to hear these types of things. And I think one thing that's important is just having a bigger voice than just Dan going to the ministry and saying, I'm not catching or seeing as many lake whitefish. I think when we collectively hear these things and it's brought forward to me and our organization, that it has some weight in terms of bringing these conversations to the table, especially at the fisheries stakeholder committee level. So like I said, I'm taking notes, and these are the types of things that I want to bring back to the ministry and one of the action items that I'll have after this meeting. So just Claire, are we going to be able to share my email address at the end? Dan and Wayne in particular, I'm hoping that you guys, maybe we could just circle back after the fact and we could touch base and just kind of continue the conversation. And I'm sure that would represent a lot of the other thoughts on the and opinions on the call too. I'm sure it's just not you guys, and really the data suggests it as well. So I think I'm just in agreement. So.
To answer
Thank
your
you.
question, Adam, yes, I've already done that. Adam's email is in the chat, and I just want to say big thanks for offering to do that. These committees are really important, and I'm really happy that we have somebody here tonight that can relay that message right back to the people that are working with the province of Ontario. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think one of the messages that I hear is that people would like some more information communicated. I mean, that's been a big frustration in the last few years too. For me, I've had, you know, I'm having a much harder time finding information about Lake Simcoe, and I spend my day doing that. So it's true. There's less information than maybe there should be. So we're almost out of time here. So Donny's actually going to kind of start off our what you can do. So Donny and then Adam and then I will each do kind of a wrap up about what we think would be helpful moving forward.
Yeah, so as a closeout, guys, I suggest everybody joins the OFAH, Ontario Federation of Angler Hunters, as well as the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. Support them. Groups like this are what basically protect the health of our watersheds and our lakes, so we can actually go out and play and fish. If the lake's not healthy, the fishery won't be healthy, and these are the guys helping us out. Remember to use municipal access responsibly. This is a big thing right now, guys. If you're going off a road end and you're taking your boat out in the spring, maybe a road end is not the best choice. Please use the launches. Limit erosion on the shorelines. I know municipalities are really keeping tabs on these things, and they're starting to close down access points due to shoreline erosion, pollution, and noise pollution, guys. Keep it down when you're heading out in the mornings. You know, make your noise out in the lake. You don't need to be all rowdy in the mornings. People are sometimes still in bed. You might be going out before sun up, but some people are probably still trying to sleep in there, guys. One other thing, take someone fishing, guys. Take someone out with you. If they experience Lake Simcoe, they're going to fall in love with Lake Simcoe, and they're going to want to help protect Lake Simcoe, guys. So take someone fishing. You hear these things, take a kid fishing. Take anyone fishing, guys. Get out in the water and enjoy it. Adam?
Yeah, I just want to thank Claire, who's I didn't know what to expect with this, and she was very responsible in terms of bringing the crowd together in this unique team, I would say, and it's very much appreciated. I was a little bit nervous coming into this, not expecting, not knowing what to expect with the questions and what sort of diversity I would get on the biology side of things, but just happy to be a part of this. Simcoe, I kind of live quite far away from it now, but it's pretty near and dear to me in terms of my experience there, just on a personal level fishing, but as well through my career and working on different projects, including research projects there. So it means a lot. I have a lot of friends too that fish Lake Simcoe as well. So to tie it into the OFAH, I don't really care if you want to be necessarily a member of the OFAH. I mean, I do, but the point of what I'm bringing up is just be a part of an organization that's bigger than yourself. So whether it's the OFAH, whether it's the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, Ducks Unlimited, the list goes on and on. Being a part of something bigger than yourself is key here. And then I hope that I can tie in Wayne and I think it was Dan's comments, bring it back to our level and what we do, and bring it to the ministry, and then look for ways that to explore solutions to these sorts of problems. It's one sort of facet of what our organization does, and yeah, so that's all I got. Really appreciate it, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Adam. I really appreciate you having, the conversations with us ahead of time, figuring out what our top questions are. And I think we covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate you bringing your expertise. So for me to close, again, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I want to really encourage you to look at the handout that I linked you to. There was a question about salt, and so I'm very quickly going to tie that in with my closing. So we have been, as I said at the beginning, working on fighting the Bradford bypass and talking about the impacts of growth in the Lake Simcoe watershed a lot the last few years. I mean, I've been talking about growth in the Lake Simcoe watershed for at least 10 years. It's really the biggest problem that we have in terms of overall impacts to the health of the entire ecosystem. You know, that's the habitat of birds and bugs and animals, you know, the extent of the road network, all of those things impact the lake's health. And the reason we have the Lake Simcoe Protection Act and Plan is because the lake is very sensitive. It is less than 1% of the volume of Lake Ontario. So we can't just dump sewage into it like we do for our other Great Lakes. I mean, Lake Simcoe is sort of a microcosm of what is going to happen if you treat your lake like a sewer that has no limits. We have very, very well treated sewage going into Lake Simcoe, but it doesn't really matter if there is a lot of it and a lot of people, and there's stormwater. It's not just sewage, it's also stormwater. It's what runs through the ditches in your town. It's what you put on your lawn. It's whether you pick up your dog poo, all of this stuff. It all flows down to the lake. So the Bradford bypass, I do want to say, you know, it's been a really interesting year of fighting that with major support from the community. I think we really changed public opinion about whether it's a good idea to put a raised highway over the biggest, most significant wetland in the Lake Simcoe watershed, which is already quite stressed. And as fisher people, something to keep in mind is that, you know, the highways produce salt, and it is almost impossible to remediate that. And we know the impacts of major highways on water. The province was, or the Conservation Authority actually was studying before Highway 404 and after Highway 404 going across the Maskinonge River. And so before Highway 404, the water quality samples exceeded the acceptable chloride or salt level like 12% of the time. And after the 404 was there, it was more than 70% of the time. I don't have that fact right there, but it's higher than 70. And of course, salt is really bad for these sort of nurseries, these wetlands. Is that the word, Donny? The nurseries and the wetlands where your little fish grow up. So we have to treat all this like it really matters, because it does. And, you know, as Adam was saying, it's really hard to remove invasive species once they're there. It's really hard to remediate ecosystem damage once it's done. And so my repeat message is, let's not mess up the lake. Like, let's make decisions that will not harm it while we still have a chance, because it is a lovely lake. We can all still swim in it, and it's very fishable. So let's work together on taking care of our lake. And I really encourage you to do that in the ways that you can, by communicating with your elected officials locally and provincially and federally as well. And please join the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition or follow us on social media so you get a little bit more in terms of what you can do. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks so much. We hope you all have a good end of your evening, and we hope to see you at something like this again. Okay, thanks a lot.
Fantastic.
Ciao for now.
Thanks, guys.